much for the kind words. My name is Erin Barr, and appreciate my wife coming out to listen to me speak as well. She's going to hopefully make sure I don't speak too fast when I get nervous or say anything inappropriate. So I appreciate her coming and listening to me prattle on here as she does at home so often. So media mix modeling, that has been a challenge for the longest time. And from an advertising perspective, Elevate Marketing, we are a full service integrated marketing consortium. We focus primarily on lead generation, dealing with companies where their marketing efforts are primarily direct to consumer based as opposed to other types of distribution channels like retail, shelf space, and things of that nature. So we've worked with many clients in the healthcare field, education. We do brick and mortar support, but for the most part that's based on, again, driving leads and traffic and appointment setting and things of that nature. Some services that we offer, basically around marketing, media, creative, reporting, and analytics. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this. And we set out to address a few things when we started about 5 years ago. But essentially for today's discussion, I'm going to focus on strategy, planning, and accountability or analytics. We had a client who, she was a brilliant woman. She did the brand for Starbucks when they were growing, E-Trade, things of that nature. And she made a comment to me once that has stuck with me for the longest time. And she said, you know what, Erin, we are a tactic in search of a strategy. And that just hit me like a ton of bricks. A lot of folks in advertising, especially the direct-to-consumer world, do a lot of testing. They'll test, and if it pays out, great, we'll throw a lot more money against it. However, the downside to that is if it doesn't quite hit a certain threshold, it's like a jumbo jet trying to take off. It just kind of bounces along the runway. It doesn't quite get enough thrust to really accelerate it into another level. And oftentimes we get involved with clients that are at that level where they can't seem to break through a certain level because 1 + 1 = 2. But the nice thing is, the only math you'll hear from me today is 1 + 1 can actually equal 3 or more, where the confluence of results. We've done a lot of studies and things of that nature where, as an example, you run a television commercial, you get a certain level of activity. Direct mail has a certain level of activity. But if you get to a certain weight level in television, like up to 100 rating points or so, we can see direct mail increase by about 43% in lead rate and 25% in acquisition. So that's where the combination of media, flighting, and things of that nature really pay off. So some of the institutional challenges, this is based off of the DMA Fact book for 2017, Data and Marketing Association. But essentially, a lot of marketing teams, they're broken out by channel. You have your digital channel, you have your print channel, you have your television channel, and everybody's working in their silos. And in that context, you have different agencies that are handling things, and generally speaking, those agencies are fighting for their share of spend. Obviously, the digital team doesn't want to forfeit their dollars to offline, so offline doesn't work because we can't track it with a pixel or other areas like we can with digital, so that's kind of some black box. So. And then conversely, television, well, the reason your digital is working so well is because my offline or my print or my direct mail is driving the, shall we say, like the mental currency, if you will, that allows a person to do the Google search and do a branded or a non-branded search. So many teams are siloed, some are somewhat integrated as they go through, starting to realize the challenges with data integration and then really understanding what the numbers are telling you. Cross-channel advertisers planned integration. As you can see, there's a lot of different types of advertising out there, and more folks are trying to integrate their website with their advertising. Addressable TV, direct mail, in-store. And data disparity is largely to blame for a lot of the silos and issues that are occurring. Management of channels are in silos, disparate data sources, non-integrated tech platforms. So before we get into any modeling, we have to go out and acquire data, whether it's the client's primary first-party data, third-party data. Use MRI a lot from GfK, so very helpful in what they provide, and so it's very helpful. So direct response marketing, current state of business, measuring performance and ROI is a big need. Improving the quality of leads. You know, a lot of folks, we look at the cost per lead, cost per acquisition, and oftentimes the unintended consequence of focusing on a certain part of the lead continuum. Focus on leads, you can have an adverse effect on your sales. You focus on sales, you have an adverse effect on your pipeline. So that is a very important aspect. And then the desired direction of growth. I mean, this goes without saying, but sometimes you have to say it. Increasing revenue derived from existing customers, proving the ROI of our marketing activities, and growing traffic to website. We focus more on 1 and 3. Increasing revenue derived from existing customers. We work with other sources and CRM companies and things of that nature. So this is BayesiaLab. Got permission from Stefan, and he did such a marvelous job at explaining this yesterday that I'm just going to touch on why we got excited about BayesiaLabs. We started using it, I want to say around May of this year. So we are the neophytes in the room, and the thing that really hit me is we build these models, and the A plus B plus C plus ... equals 1,000. What does A equal? We don't have a laboratory with very clear and concise output many times. What does A equal depends on B and C and so on and so forth, and the media landscape is changing at such a dynamic rate. A lot of folks have attempted to answer these questions through either linear regression or time series or things of that nature, and they will show an immediate positive impact, like the Hawthorne effect. You put your eyes on it, you have a good result. The challenge is over time, the models start to converge into another direction where they become unprofitable and having issues in that capacity. So the first time I met BayesiaLab was during a marketing mix discussion, and the whole concept of a nonlinear causal relationship really caught my attention. So Stefan has been incredibly gracious, giving up a lot of time, taking my calls and helping me learn quite a bit about this. So if you haven't met with him, he's very nice. He's willing to take calls on Sundays at 2 a.m. No, I digress. But specific to media, you know, we talk about this, and this is what I heard from him, and you know, half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is that I don't know which half. So even more so today, this is John Wanamaker from, I don't know, a long time ago. And that was at a time when advertising wasn't as prolific as it is now. I believe now, I remember when I first started advertising, the average consumer is hit with roughly 3,000 commercial impressions per day. And that number with mobile advertising and things of that nature is escalated to estimated of over 7,000 commercial impressions a day. So brand building and things of that nature has become increasingly difficult, and with the artificial intelligence that people who have bought this have also bought that, has kind of narrowed people into certain channels, and it's really tough to break out and grow your brand just from a pure awareness play. And so people nowadays are hit with all these different types of media, whether it's referral, seasonality plays a role, direct mail, TV, radio, SEM, SEO, which is search engine marketing or optimization. And clients would get a ton of revenue and they'd build linear regression media mix models and try to identify what it is that happened. Budgets are pretty consistent throughout the year, so finding that variability in the data was a challenge. And so over time, you end up with kind of some homogeneous models of I spend a lot, I get a lot, so that's that. We direct response advertisers, we thought that we had the answer back in, I don't know, like the infomercial days and when TV was deregulated in the States and you could run a 30-minute program. You know, people started putting phone numbers on their commercials, and next thing you know, you put something on and your commercial costs $1,000, you ask for a credit card, you get $2,000 in revenue hitting your merchant account the next day. Television advertising and other forms of direct response media became very lucrative. And so next thing you know, a lot of us broke out into our silos. We had you know, our television and digital, brick and mortar. But again, the challenge is the sum of the parts does not exceed the whole oftentimes. And so we start getting into situations where, as I mentioned earlier, TV's running their advertising and something's happening over here on internet. They can't understand why it is. They do all their tests and their A/B split tests and things of that nature without talking to television, who launches a new promotion or print or direct mail or what have you. they can't understand. So utilizing unique response codes, we can determine if the LA Times is running 800-555-1212 or using the URL of mycompany.com, just type in promo code 532 for these savings. We know exactly who's clicking, who's calling. It's the same thing as putting event tracking or pixel tracking on the digital site. But again, the sum total of those parts become very disparate. So kind of an example of a particular client who's very siloed. The blue represents direct browser type-ins. And this to me is just a running total. To give an example, we have non-branded search in the orange. People are just looking for this particular product category is growing on their website at a faster rate than a direct browser type-in. If you're spending money on advertising over time, to save money on brand awareness and things of that nature, we'll use brand searches as a proxy of brand awareness. So what you kind of want to see is over time for this particular client, you look at a running total, and they were running predominantly print and some digital optimizations, SEO. They were maximizing that aspect. But until they introduced mass awareness types of media, the organic was growing at a more rapid pace. Once we introduced awareness media, but we call it transactional awareness, phone numbers and URLs and trackable media, all of a sudden when we get up to a couple years later, their direct is starting to outpace their organic search. So one of the things about BayesiaLab that kind of excited us is, again, back to the nonlinear relationships. This chart is just meant to demonstrate the ad decay, the halo effect that occurs. We call it the collective audience memory depreciation value. If you have 1,000 people that are watching a TV commercial at 10 a.m., at 10:01 a.m., the memory doesn't go away, but oftentimes a lot of models, time series, things of that nature, you're looking for XY type relationships and data in order to create that linear relationship. But the time series models that are used may only have a 4-minute, 5-minute burst or response window. But then what happens when you have print or direct mail that doesn't have a discrete moment in time of something occurring? So we look at it as, and my associate did a lot of research on neuroscience and how people remember, and it actually correlated with a lot of research that but results that we have with various clients that would run a phone number or a unique URL or whatever the case might be at certain levels and then turn it off and then watch how the decay occurs over time. And invariably you would have a huge spike of activity within the first few minutes, but over time you have a lot more drag coming in that most models, that drag gets lost in the noise. So this just represents, each one of these colors is a different television station and the impression levels that it bears. But as you can see, every time something runs, it kind of decays over time, and there's an additive effect of advertising after advertising after advertising. This is, I think, like a 36-hour period of time to where you kind of see this S-curve happening, and at this point, when you stop advertising, your sales don't stop, your results don't stop, so you kind of decay over time. So how do you attribute sales that come in a day, 2 days, 3 days after an ad impression has been incurred? So as mentioned, a lot of time series models, you look for the signal, the noise, you see as time progresses, you see a spike, you clip off a couple of minutes, and that goes and it's bifurcated out or broken out on a probabilistic basis. And again, you miss a lot of the activity of mass media coming in, and when you launch it, you just see the direct starting to take off compared to the other aspects, and oftentimes the direct does have an impact on other channels. So our process, kind of the way that we handle this type of stuff is, we want to identify what your target audience is. MRI helps us out significantly with that, and if you're not familiar, it's I think it's the American Consumer Survey that we use. It's a survey that's sent out to, I think it's 2 waves of 25,000 people a wave, so you can have a double base of 50,000 sample size. And they go through and ask you every question as far as, what kind of vehicle do you drive? What toothpaste do you use? Do you suffer from hearing loss? Have you treated your hearing loss? Have you bought a device? What type of medicine do you use? Do you drink beer? What type of beer? And you could do a crosstab and figure out the age and all that type of stuff. So we bring in that type of target information, historical data from our clients. We also consume the communications messaging, whether it's a TV ad, the print when it ran, social listening where appropriate. So if we can capture public relations articles and things of that nature. And then the responses, whether it's local sales at the brick and mortar, CRM data, or phone calls, or clicks, or web forms, or bring in chats from the third-party vendors for that. And then any type of third-party data that the client may subscribe to, or we subscribe to, or have access to, and all that's brought in. And oftentimes with some of our clients, just bringing that type of stuff together and putting it into one area and doing fundamental descriptive analytics sometimes is a step ahead of where they are. Just simple math, this divided by that can give them a big insight. And then we go through the processes most of us in here do, diagnostic, predictive, and prescriptive. And from that, we output many different reports from nonlinear relationships, what happened, what we think is going to happen, what advertising impacted other advertising. And what we're excited is with BayesiaLab starting to come out with how do we optimize, how does each particular media interact with each other in a sensitivity analysis and things of that nature. And then we have our process of, this is just a picture of how we bring in our data. So whether it's an API for Google Analytics or flat files or any other type of data element, we consume all the data, clean it up, and we push out the files that are needed for any type of advertising that we need. So we started playing with BayesiaLabs this year, and simple types of models. And we broke out seasonality. This is a basic augmented naive Bayes. And the nice thing about this is it found relationships between like radio and out of home, which intuitively makes sense. You drive down the road, you're listening to the radio, you hear an ad, you see you're out of home, those two come together, help to drive sales. But then we can also see how each independent station does, each independent media does with direct sales. We can also bring in the competitive spend. And then, this is a pretty, like I say, simple network. When you have all their media spend and you have all the sales, your R squared should be relatively straightforward with a predictive type of a model. And then we pull out our contributions of each media. And oftentimes in media, I kind of laugh. You've got your, in here, science math and accounting math. Where's my penny? In media, it's kind of, it's going in this direction. And we try to be as scientific as we can. We apply a lot of science, but it is tough to model out human behavior and a lot of different aspects and how they consume, when they consume, why they consume, from a media perspective, especially if you've been running in the same area for a while, saturation, reach frequency. Utilizing just spend data sometimes is difficult because you spend $100,000 and you buy, one day part, that's a certain reach and frequency to an audience versus, prime time versus, the LA Times versus what have you. So we don't necessarily have a lot of data that comes through. So, this is a sample size of like 70, 80 observations, a year and a half of weekly data that were provided and cleansed and put through. So that's where the expert knowledge comes through that I really appreciated again about BayesiaLabs, that you can look at things and are things intuitive. You start at a global level. Does this type of media outperform that type of media? And then understanding, having interacted with other media and being able to measure it to determine if some of these things make sense. Oftentimes you will see various little artifacts in the data if you don't have a significant sample size or data size. But it allows us to start to make some intuitive decisions. Back to the drag effect, we talked about, or I talked about that. This is a period of over 7 days that advertising stops, and you start to see how the curves are developing. And this is based off of a client that had a unique URL, mycompany.com/TV. You know that everybody that types in /TV saw a TV ad somewhere, so there should theoretically be no base. Previous modeling attempts, though, using a time series would end up with this particular client having a significant chunk of their data being sourced to miscellaneous or noise or base or whatever you want to call it. And that particular scenario, as I mentioned earlier, you end up with a model that favors frequency over reach. So running, I don't know, a Super Bowl spot, unless you do survey and things of that nature, over time, if you have 100 other ads that are running after that, next thing you know, those are the ones that are starting to steal the responses from the bigger ads. So, you know, we look at that as a death by 1,000 paper cuts, where, you know, models and statistically speaking and R-squareds and all that look like it's doing what it's supposed to do. But once you start accounting for larger curves and things of that nature, it improves the results greatly. So here's another model that we put together, and Stefan and Lionel were most gracious in the development of this, helping me understand. But we have our target node of TV sales, TV sales. So we're able to parse out which responses were to television, and we know that there's a seasonality component where, interestingly enough, retail and springtime, second quarter, May sweeps, things of that nature, are real popular for television advertising. But in cold weather markets, people are indoors, it's cold, viewership is actually higher, there's not as much of a demand on inventory. So as direct response folks, we enjoy the first quarter aspect. So we break out, we understand there's seasonality, and then each one of these nodes is a day part. Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., early fringe, prime time, access, weekend day parts, things of that nature. And so we can optimize based off of the sales. But the nice thing about what I'm enjoying about BayesiaLabs is the ability to incorporate the function node. When I first started looking at this, looking at the chapter in the book, all of the models were based off of spend. But again, you buy TV, you spend $100,000 in television. If it's all prime, that's a certain cost function. And if it's all daytime or overnights, that's another cost function. So we created these hidden nodes where we can put in the ability to tie in a cost per point, which rating point, a percentage of the viewing audience, for each of the day parts. So Monday through Friday early morning might be, I don't know, $1,800 for 1% of the country to buy that. Whereas prime might be $10,000 cost per thousand. So now you can start playing with things, put in your costs for all these different areas, tie that into the model spend that's been coming through, and we use rating points here as opposed to spend. So now you can model anything out, and you can adjust for any time of the month or year. And if you think that your costs are going to increase, you apply that new cost to the day part, and without impacting your sales numbers, your projected forecast, you can start to see how your KPIs will work. So we put in our KPIs, which is a simple, you know, your total spend divided by your total orders, and we allow the ability to put in an upper and lower limit and having a standard deviation so that you can start to see a range of responses come through. We also looked at, we temporalized, and just an example of throwing in an afternoon time period using a constraint node here, making sure that these nodes are equal. And as we ran through, and this was very recently, to kind of take a look at how Bayesian networks will look at drag, it was pretty interesting what we're finding out. So this is the model side, and then how you can use it from the monitor side. These are just all the different data elements, but it's really nice to see you can intervene on winter, pick your months that you want to go on, fix your costs for all the different day parts, and then you have what happens with your sales come through. And as you intervene on the different areas, we can start to see that if I add more afternoon, what'll that do to my sales? And not just that, if my cost per point goes up by 15%, I may get 10% more sales, but at 15% increase, now we can start really fine tuning and looking at where to go and play with it. Another aspect of BayesiaLabs, which has been incredibly helpful, is you look at media mix. So we look at how different medias, radio, if you spend a little, you don't get very much. So if you have a limited budget, you don't start with radio, you kind of pick in, so maybe, you know, outbound business development would be the first place you start, and as you build your budgets, then you can start to identify, you know, radio, when you go from here to here, all of a sudden it becomes the most prominent medium. So now, if your budget is such that you can do a 70 point a week schedule or something like that, that will yield you significantly more sales than a one-to-one business development type of an activity. And these are normalized. From a day part selection, as mentioned, there are certain day parts that perform better than others. Certain day parts like late fringe or that just start to peter out after a while. So when I'm dealing with day parts and media and lengths, 30-second commercial versus 15 versus 60 versus whatever the case might be, it can become quite a challenge to where do I put my money? Do I put 50% in my 15s or do I put only 30%? Does reach frequency, you know, is this brand mature where a 15-second unit, I don't need to explain a lot, is sufficient enough to drive the overall business? Or do I need to still educate and use a 60-second commercial, which has less reach and frequency but builds more immediacy? And then from a competitive perspective, this part is really fascinating for me from a advertising and strategy perspective, because in this case we can show how as the competitor increases their spend, it starts to eat into our share. So obviously that's a non-confounder and there's nothing we can do about it in terms of we can't spend more for them, we can't spend less for them, but there's other third-party research tools that we look at, and we can look at their spend trend and things of that nature and learn how to out-pivot them or what have you. Sometimes you can outshout your competition, but more often than not, you have to outsmart them and find different areas to go, or, you know, be a big fish in a small pond and go dominate one area and kind of push them out of the arena. So there's a lot of different strategies, but understanding the competitive impact is incredibly helpful. And this is just to demonstrate that, you know, at least for us in the States, the media landscape is constantly evolving, and this is just for television. The source is Nielsen on this. Their subscriber bases for national cable going back to 2008 by month, and cord cutting is a reality. So to have a predictive model that goes back 3 years, 4 years, 5 years with several thousand variables or observations is difficult, because what happened back here is much different than what's happening here. And that's just one medium. You add in the proliferation of digital and online video. Facebook is crescendoed. Now you read articles that that's kind of decreasing or moving over to Snap and other platforms. So it's really difficult to have an environment, if you will, of a laboratory of very clear and discrete testing environments. But this just demonstrates that over time you start to see, and some cable networks will grow. NFL Network, we love our football, so you know, subscriber bases grow for that. Other areas are decreasing. This is just an example of A&E, Bravo, CNN News, Discovery Channel, things of that nature. And some stations decline more rapidly than others, but they still follow the same type of pattern. ESPN, in this example, declining faster than the others. So we mentioned the decay rate, and seeing this in BayesiaLab, and we haven't, my associate and I, we've incorporated these types of curves using other means, but to see the BayesiaLab with, you know, one data set to come in and start to identify that there are certain decay rates. If you buy prime time, you're not going to see the immediacy. You will see immediate activity, especially with mobile phones, people going on and search and things of that nature. But studies have been done of programming attentiveness. You know, when people are watching daytime television, terrible TV, they're more willing to walk away from that program and pick up the phone or make a phone call or do a search. But at prime time, if you're with your family or you're watching television, you might do a search, but oftentimes maybe the next day at work, not for me, but the next day at work, you know, people do their search, and especially Monday through Wednesday, start searching and prepare for their weekends and make their plans. So how do you tie all that type of stuff together? Well, Bayesian Labs is helping us to start to identify that certain media decay much faster. If you run this particular media, the impulsiveness is over quickly, and you go right back down to your baseline level, where other areas will decrease. Well, prime time is an example from an immediacy, cost per acquisition, which is what most direct marketers bet their careers on, is our greatest strength, if mismanaged, is our greatest weakness. And the greatest strength of us direct marketers is we know today what happened yesterday. We can measure the activity on the web, check our merchant accounts, things of that nature. That's also our greatest weakness because of these types of aspects where a lot of these things get lost in the noise. So BayesiaLabs, we haven't fully exploited this capability yet as it's new to our purview, but very excited about the opportunity of seeing how that plays in, given how we address those types of curves now. And then for our good folks from GFK, they have surveys and stuff, and even print. Print can decay upwards of 23 weeks, and if you buy a January issue, trying to put January into a model, you can be hitting the newsstands up to 7 weeks before January. So, mid-November, you're starting to hit the newsstands. So print, that might be why GFK or MRI started, because I think it's more for print than anything, but print doesn't get a lot of, credit in media mix models for this type of a reason. Much like display advertising for the longest time didn't get a lot of credit in the online world, and so then Google comes up with view through or metrics and things of that nature, so that you can really account for other media. So all of these things are brought in, and the optimization feature just demonstrates how business development, direct mail, display influencer, out of home, paid social, radio, search, television, given the amount of points that we're trying to achieve, or the spending that we're trying to maximize, radio, decrease it a little bit, television, increase a little bit, and you just kind of see how you go through the different media. Sometimes a strategy, the best strategy is just evolution versus revolution. You don't need to radically change things, but a 5% tweak here, a 10% adjustment there can have incredible effects long term. We've had situations where, from a direct response perspective, running media in various markets, the numbers are still coming out, but the media starts to come back and complain because of saturation and things of that nature. With the ability to have these types of tools that will help us, I believe, to start to identify what those issues are, we're just very excited. From a web simulator perspective, the nice thing is was demonstrated already, we could take all this type of knowledge and throw it into a web simulator and pass that off to a client, let them play with it. So they can go in and put in how many points they think they should run for that particular week, and we can play with, what is my cost per point for these various day parts and day part mixes and things of that nature. And you come back with your graph of, does this increase or decrease my activity? And I think that's about it. And then from there, we build out forecast models and provide dashboards and insights to just, here's what happens, so that people can have a tally of what's going on and measure the overall health of their company. And like I say, with appointment setting, we built in forecast type models where we could predict out that if a hospital gets 3,000 leads this week, then we know that those 3,000 leads over the course of, 90 days, they get 90% of their patients. So based on that distribution, we know by week 4 they should have X amount of patients from those leads. So we build out those types of forecast models so that we can see how we're pacing. By week 4, we should have 176. We're actually at 168. So therefore, now we can start looking at lead scoring and go looking at the patients or whatever, sales or whatever the case might be, to determine how to go about that. So anyways, that's all I got, and thank you for listening.